an autocratic potentate by the name of Qatar that for many years has used the Qatari royal family owned and operated Al Jazeera news network to spew all sorts of things against India. This network has now, in the scope of a crisis already in the Middle East, the Qatari jurisprudence system has now pronounced a verdict of death sentence, execution against 8 Indian Navy veterans that were working for a firm based in Qatar and advising the Navy of that potentate autocracy in the acquiring of submarines, stealth submarines from Italy. They were working for a company called Dahra Global Technologies and Consultancy Services after having taken retirement from the Indian Navy. Of the 8 include Commander Purnendu Tiwari, who was the managing director of the firm. Commander Tiwari was conferred the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman Award in 2019. He was decorated officer. The other include Navtej Singh Gill, Birendra Kumar Sugwankar, Sanjeev Gupta, Rajesh Gopakumar, and Saurav Vishisht. Ladies and gentlemen, the Qataris had signed an MOU to work with an Italian company to provide these stealth submarines. These individuals were working with a firm which also employed 70-80 other Indians before it was shut down, who were providing consultancy services to do the training of the Qataris in their operation. Unofficially, because officially the statement hasn't been made either by the Qataris or the MEA, but unofficially they're accused of spying, and they're not accused of spying for India, they're accused of spying for Israel. In Qatar, the death penalty is carried out by firing squad. Now you can well imagine what is going on. The Qataris have just convicted 8 Indian decorated Navy veterans of spying for Israel and given them the death penalty for execution by firing squad. Now, I don't need a rocket scientist here to draw exactly what is going on. So, let's call a spade a spade. We have tried our outreach with Qatar. In fact, we strung out Nupur Sharma to dry primarily because of objections that were first raised from Qatar, because our then Vice President Venkaiah Naidu was on a visit when that incident took place. So we've done the outreach, we've made our efforts, and this is their answer. The Qatari regime, which has more than a dubious human rights record, and you can check it out on an extensive series we've done right here on NewsX called the Qatar Files. You can find them on YouTube, which is an autocracy and which is closely allied with Turkey and Pakistan, and many can well argue that the entire confabulation of entrapping these officers and accusing them of spying for Israel has been done at the behest of following the modus operandi of the Pakistanis in the Kulbhushan Jadhav case, where they kidnapped an Indian Navy veteran from Iran, brought him to Pakistan, and then convicted him of spying. It's rather predictable. Now the question is, what do you do next? Do you keep it quiet and do a deal? And do a deal would mean, do you sell out Israel? Because that's what the Qataris would want. Would you do a barter with them? Or do you now treat them with the fire and fury which they deserve? Let's open up this conversation. Let me quickly get in Professor Madhav Nalapat. Professor Nalapat, firing squad of Indian Army, Indian Navy veterans working to actually advise the Qataris on how to boost their naval capabilities, and unofficially accused of spying for Israel. What do we do?
Look, the reality of the situation is that, judging by the timing of this particular verdict, Qatar is essentially, basically going after these unfortunate individuals, mainly because India has taken a very principled stand on this conflict in Gaza. And India is very clear that the Hamas does not represent the Gazans. It does not represent the Palestinian people. And you'll remember that the Prime Minister himself gave a tweet, a very supportive tweet about the rights of the Palestinian people, soon after he had given a tweet basically saying that this terror attack on Israel was completely unpardonable. Now, this is basically a way of getting back at India by Qatar. And yes, the reality is, Rishabh, now Al Jazeera talks incessantly of democracy. Well, I'm not sure when the last election was held in Qatar. It's certainly not, for a very, very, very long time, probably since the beginning of the foundation of the state of Qatar. And let me also say that, look, the Israelis don't need Indians to spy for them in Qatar. There are more than enough Qataris who are basically angry at the excesses and the wealth of the royal family, and many Qataris who are upset with them, who are quite willing to basically do the same job. And this is, this is very clearly, as you said in the case of Kulbhushan Jadhav, a trumped-up case. And this trumped-up case has been brought about because Qatar is basically signaling that it is very unhappy with India for its principled stand on the Gaza conflict.
So let's call a spade, and the consequences of the spade are very real. There is an access, ladies and gentlemen, 22% of the Qatari native population right now is India's diaspora. So 1 in 5 people living in Qatar are Indians. Commodore Anil Jai Singh, I'm sure you've heard the news, sir. Now, we can apply pressure, but there are two options: do a deal or not. What do we do, sir?
No, I think I'm sure these being naval veterans, the government must be putting in every effort. It may not be publicizing it, but I'm sure the government must be putting in every effort to get them either, have them returned back to the country, repatriated, or at least get them a fair trial if Qatar indeed has something to go on. But so far it has really not been very effective. There was hope in between when they got consular access that, things will be looked at differently. But I think today this is a very disappointing decision. I mean, most of us naval people are in a state of shock, frankly speaking. And all these officers were, had impeccable records in the Indian Navy. And that's the reason why they were able to go, and they were actually training the Qatari Navy. The Qataris should be grateful for the training they received from these officers rather than throwing the book at them. And I don't think any of these people, their integrity has been above, any kind of reproach throughout their illustrious careers in the Navy. So I wouldn't think that they would resort to anything so untoward that it deserves a death penalty. I mean, I'm quite shocked, frankly speaking. And I think we'll really have to redouble our efforts diplomatically and in whatever way, politically, at the prime ministerial level or whatever, to ensure that these officers get a fair deal or just have them repatriated to India.
Okay.
I mean, that sort of clout India should be able to exercise in that region.
So allow me to be blunt. The Qataris are trying to create a point of negotiation, and they will want something in return. What do you want to offer, or offer nothing and take a principled stand? That's easier said than done. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, you've just heard the verdict, sir. You can better understand the timing of it and the context within which it is coming. What do you suspect is going on?
Well, I think it is a political decision, and it's very unfortunate because if these are very honorable, service officers who have served in uniform, who have served their country, who have served other countries, as we just heard, in training purposes, who have served Qatar also. Now, they are not terrorists. They have not killed people. They have not committed any great crimes of, assassinations. And for them to be treated like this, I have been very hurt for a very long time whenever I hear the news, because it is very, very painful for me to see. And as an ambassador, I would have, I'm sure the ambassador there is taking a lot of steps, the ministry is taking a lot of steps, but we have to bring unbearable pressure to bear upon the Qatar government directly through our own sources, through our own resources, and through our other, through our other friends like UAE, like Saudi Arabia, like US, like Russia, and warn the Qatari government that this is an act which will not be acceptable even 1%. It will not be tolerated, and the repercussions will be very, very severe and very, very dire for the future. So I think that is a message which needs to be conveyed in very strong terms to the Qatari government through all of our friends, through all of our resources, so that this heinous act is stopped immediately.
Yeah,
Back to you, Rishabh.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if they had just put out a verdict saying that they're going to shoot 8 Americans in front of a firing squad, what exactly would have happened after that? Jordan Cope is joining us in the broadcast. Jordan, no surprises, but what do you make of the context of what the Qataris have just done in the timing of it? They're not accusing these naval veterans from India who are actually training Qataris in the operating of stealth submarines, ironically. I'm sure that's something that's equally upsetting to you. But they're accusing them of spying for Israel. What do you make of that?
I think just based off of what I'm hearing, the allegations seem fairly arbitrary and preposterous. And I want to note right now that Qatar is launching an assault on democracies around the world. It sponsored Hamas to the tune of $1.8 billion US since 2012. And in recent years and that was just until 2021, and it's upped the funding apparently. I've seen some reports suggesting it's given Hamas $360 million a year. There's blood all over Qatar's hands right now. American blood, Israeli blood, the blood of civilians from 41 countries around the world in the latest Hamas massacre. Everybody should be furious right now. And Qatar's pivot to try to now potentially assume the blood of supposedly innocent Indian naval officers only explodes this issue. And so I think it's time that the world ultimately takes a principled stand against Qatar, against its terrorism financing, against its autocracy, against its judiciary, which the Emir controls, by the way, according to Freedom House. Qatar is not a free country. It is not democratic. And the Emir very much assumes a significant role in the affairs of the legislature and the executive.
Okay. So Jordan, assuming that good-natured conversations are not going to work, okay? As we speak, you and I well know that Qatar is being used as a mediator with Hamas for the release of hostages, okay? So let alone hold the Qataris accountable, they are being utilized to have indirect conversation with Hamas. So in this context, who's going to hold them accountable?
So I first would like to push back on the mediation role a bit, because Qatar is not a reliable mediator. The US trusted Qatar previously to be a mediator, and what happened? The Taliban ultimately ended up being restored to power. A month ago, the US and Qatar and Iran underwent mediation, with Qatar functioning as the mediator. We released some of our hostages, some Iranian captives were released, and Qatar ultimately assured that $6 billion US would be channeled towards the Iranian regime. And a geopolitical expert, Richard Goldberg, observed that this would create a precedent for more US people being taken hostage in the future. And here we are now with US hostages and Hamas. And so I ultimately think Qatar cannot be trusted as a mediator. And we have to realize that Qatar ultimately creates conflicts, incites them, and then pursues a mediator role to which it seeks to benefit.
Okay, so Sumit, let's call a spade, okay? We know that there is a Qatari, Turkish, Pakistani axis that is operating. We know that the OIC is divided over this. The Saudis and Emiratis don't want any truck with this. This is a direct and deliberate provocation. They've done it, and now they will wait for your response. There can be two responses. One is to do a deal, And you can well imagine what they'll want in that deal. The reason these people are accused of spying for Israel is they could say that India should change its diplomatic position on Israel. That could be a deal which I don't think we should take. And the other is to do exactly what happened when a certain Indian Air Force officer was shot down and returned within 48 hours. Which option should we take? Should we do a deal, or should we remind them of hell hath no fury?
Rishabh, thanks for having me on your show. It's a very unfortunate incident. Look, first of all, Indian Navy or Indian Navy officers do not spy for Qatar. Qatar is weaponizing the gas reserves. We have seen weaponizing of dollar. This is weaponizing of gas reserves. They know world is dependent on gas for them after the Russian fiasco. They know India's 20% gas comes on them. They are flexing their muscles beyond their awqat, beyond their stature. And they are trying to send a message to India, you have sided with Israel. This is why we are doing it. How come suddenly the Israel angle comes in? How come spying for Israel comes in? We have to teach them the lesson in the language they understand. Diplomacy and all doesn't work with them. This is the country which supports all jihadi terrorist organizations in the world. Any to every terrorist organization gets funded by Qatar. When you rightly pointed out, in the case of Nupur Sharma, they put a lot of pressure on us. And at that point of time, for geopolitical compulsions, we said, okay, we have to manage the situation a bit. But today, they are started hitting at our core. Putting 9 of our decorated officers to a firing squad is like putting the stature of India on the line. And the country we are, the stature we have, and the teeny-miny country called Qatar with 3 million people, $330 billion of GDP is not a big force to reckon with. And they are the people who have even threatened Americans, up for their airbase. Recently, Iran's foreign minister has told Qatar, do not allow Americans to access their airbase in Qatar. And where was Ismail Haniya living? Ismail Haniya was living in Qatar when the fiasco happened, when the targeted attack happened. Where was he offering Namaz Shukrana? It was in Qatar. And who was broadcasting it? Al Jazeera network to the whole world. Now, you cannot imagine a more excess of evil, a direct supporter of terrorism than Hamas, than Qatar. If you let them go, they will come bigger, they will come stronger, and they will hit us again. It's a message which is being sent to India. Look, your interested officers can be the bargaining chips on the table in the Middle East. Rishabh, this is a dangerous situation, and if we don't teach them what capable we are, unko thodi auqat ginani padegi, then they will come and be in the line.
No, so
it's 3 million people cannot dictate terms to us.
It's immediately about the life and liberty of India's naval veterans.
Right.
It's subsequently about 700,000 Indians living in Qatar, which is 1/5 of the working population there. Professor Nalapat, if 8 can be turned into de facto hostages for leverage, then there can be others who can be turned the same. Should we now reconsider the presence of India's diaspora in Qatar? It's time to start bringing people back home before they start locking up others and start accusing them of spying for Israel?
Well, Rishabh, I'd like to say the risk of that is not very large. And the Indian diaspora is there all across the Middle East. And it's a very welcome diaspora. Unlike some other diasporas, for example, that of our Western neighbor, who are very troublesome, who create law and order problems, the Indian diaspora, by and large, is very peace-loving, and there is no law and order situation arising from them at all. So, in fact, they are very welcome in all the Arab countries, and India has the best of relations with almost all Arab countries. As far as Qatar is concerned, I just want to pose a simple fact before you. 28 of the top leaders of Hamas are staying in Qatar. And do you mean to say that none of these 28 people had any inkling of what was being planned and what was carried out successfully, on that day at least, October 7? Can you tell me that? And can you tell me that none of these leaders were informed? And then can you tell me that the Qataris have not been keeping tabs on these people 24/7? Of course they'd be keeping tabs on them 24/7. They do that with everybody. And therefore, these people would have been discussing this operation, and those who kept tabs on them would have known about it. And yet, what happened? Absolute radio silence. And among the reasons, Rishabh, let me point out, there is a vicious anti-India propaganda in Al Jazeera, as you know, against India. But the fact of the matter is, there is another country which is now becoming very influential in Qatar, and that is China. And when you look at the Kulbhushan Jadhav case, when you look at this particular case, it's always targeting ex-military officers. And the reason is that the Chinese PLA is very concerned about the caliber of the Indian officers. And I think they are very concerned about the fact that Indian officers have got job opportunities across the world. So, I mean, they would be very happy at this development.
Yeah,
extremely happy.
it's multiple birds with one stone as far as you see it. The Pakistanis are going to be loving it. They've been loving it for the past 8-9 months. I can well imagine Justin Trudeau is probably going to be loving it. Let me quickly get Commodore Anil Jai Singh back into this. Commodore Singh, so what do we do? I gave you the example, although the context was much different, of Kulbhushan Jadhav, where the Pakistanis had actually gone and picked him up from Iran. But the playbook was pretty much the same. And whatever information we have is that the intense effort has also been put in by the Pakistanis for the replication of such a playbook. If so, what do we do?
See, firstly, the reason why they seem to be behind bars, or why they were picked up in the middle of the night and put into solitary confinement over a year ago, was about this fact. So, submarine that's being built for Qatar and Italy. I haven't seen any such submarine so far, either in the commission of the Qatari Navy or such a super secret submarine that, why would Indian officers be training the Qatari Navy for a super secret submarine that Qatar wants from Italy? And Italy is building a super secret submarine which nobody knows about. I find that firstly a bit difficult to swallow. Number one. Number two, I think, we've been talking about a deal. Firstly, there's no such thing as a deal. We have to bring a lot of diplomatic, obviously we can't bring military pressure to bear. We can't, declare war on Qatar. But we have to bring every possible kind of pressure to bear on Qatar. We use our friends, we use our partners. Qatar is already ostracized in the Arab world.
Commodore, sorry to interrupt you. But why are options off the table? Why can an Indian fleet not be parked off the coast of Qatar? What's the problem? There are international waters everywhere.
See, the question is, okay, you park your fleet there, but then what do you do after that? Do you blockade the country economically? So we have to see all the options. You cannot have a knee-jerk reaction.
Fair enough.
But the fundamental issue is that that carrying out such a sentence on these officers is non-negotiable as far as India is concerned. It's period. There is no question of allowing Qatar to get away with this kind of, this kind of
so
action,
on the assumption, and it might be a presumptuous...
Some banana court or kangaroo court.
Yeah,
so we have to bring whatever kind of pressure we can. I'm sure. See, Rishabh, you must understand. I'm sure there's a lot of backroom parlaying happening right now. There must be a lot of chit-chat happening.
Well, I'm assuming the backroom parlaying has been going on for the past 1 year, sir. But it's a matter that's come to a head very publicly, and they have rejected the backroom parlaying. And I am going to be presumptuous enough, Ambassador Kapoor, to assume, and it might be a presumptuous assumption, that this has been deliberately done to create a point of leverage negotiation. You will now want something from them, which is the return of your officers, and they will in turn demand something in return. What do we suspect that will be, and till what extent would that be reasonable?
Well, I am not privy to any of that information, Rishabh, but if I were to make a guess, I'm seeing the current situation in the Middle East, a very, indirect pressure or direct pressure must be, they may be trying to bring pressure to bear on India to make some statement or some gestures in favor of Hamas with the sort of influence that Hamas has in Qatar and the presence of so many senior leadership, representatives of Hamas living in luxury in Qatar. So beyond that, we have our 700,000 Indians. So what Commodore is saying about any military action right now, I don't think that is an option currently. But some severe, very firm messages have to go directly from India, which I'm sure have gone, but also from all of our allies in the Arab world, from all of our friends in the Western world, from other countries like Russia, which have some influence there. So messages have to go repeatedly that this is an act which is not acceptable.
Well,
and there is no way
Ambassador
that
Kapoor,
Qatar-
I don't expect the 2 aircraft carrier groups that the Americans have sent to start bombing Cairo, Amman, and other parts of Jordan and Lebanon tomorrow. That's not what they're there for. They're there for a different reason. That reason is generally a diplomatic reason. I don't think it's for a military reason at all. Let me quickly get Sumit back in. Sumit, now if they get away with it, which means if they carry on, then we are setting a precedent that you can put pressure on India, and India has, as Professor Nalbat put it, diaspora all over the world doing important jobs. That you can harass that diaspora and pick up in a very similar vein to what the Chinese were doing with the Canadians after the daughter of the Huawei founder was detained in Canada. They were simply picking up Canadians and creating points of diplomatic leverage. So if we succumb to doing a deal, then we are accepting that as a precedent, assuming that that is not something that we are willing to digest. After that, it has to be very simple. When what happened in the terms of Pakistan returning an Indian Air Force officer within 48 hours?
Rishabh, the only answer, the only practical viable answer is what we did with Pakistan. If teeny many countries like Qatar start flexing their muscles with us, we have had it, sir. Why military option is off the table? Why blockade is off the table? Imagine the stature of Qatar, 3 million setting and dictating terms to us. There is a time, there's always a first time. We have not done it before. We did not support Israel so openly before. No Indian Prime Minister went to Israel before Prime Minister Modi. Now, if when push comes to shove, we did what we had to do with Pakistan. We can do what we have to do with Qatar. Because if we don't do it, Rishabh, I told you earlier, Indian diaspora will be used as bargaining chips. How many people are you going to negotiate with? Kahan negotiate karoge? Kis se negotiate karoge? These people are hand in glove with all the jihadi terrorists of Middle East. Everybody lives in Qatar. Doesn't the Amir of Qatar know who is Ismail Haniya? Doesn't he know Iranians are coming there? What are Iranians doing at his home? What was Iran's External Affairs Minister doing and meeting Ismail Haniya in Qatar? Do Qatars don't know it? And incidentally, Americans tell that Qatar is our biggest ally, non-NATO ally in Middle East. So Americans have to also wake up and smell coffee. Your Turkish ally, Erdogan, is telling you that Hamas is not a terrorist organization. They are liberating their own land, and whatever they are doing it right. Yeah. American air bases in Iraq are getting attacked. American air bases in Turkey are getting attacked by the locals. This is the reality of Middle East. Okay. Diplomacy doesn't work in that part of the world.
Okay.
If you are forced,
so by doing this, you're forcing India to do something, because we can't sit idle on it, because we can't have 8 decorated naval officers facing a firing squad in an autocratic regime. It simply is not going to happen. Jordan, last thoughts. Where do you think this plays out from here? Or even if you draw the assumption that the Qataris are intending this as a bargaining chip, they don't intend to carry out the executions, because then that would be a straw too far. But they're using this as a bargaining chip. How do you see this playing out?
It's unpredictable to see how Qatar plays out, because it behaves as a friend and foe at the same time. But if I were in India's position, I would consider several courses of action. One, there's 700,000 migrant workers, I believe, of Indian nationality currently in Qatar. I would perhaps use that leverage and threaten to make it more difficult for Indian migrant workers to work in Qatar in the future.
If they return tomorrow, the Qatari economy would collapse. Simple as that. If all of them return tomorrow.
It'd be very difficult for Qatar to recover. And also, if Qatar is trying to undermine Israeli-Indian relations, as some posit, perhaps India should try to strengthen those relations in the face of this crisis to send a message that Qatar's intimidation gestures won't work. Perhaps India should consider moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Another potential option is considering listing Qatar as a state sponsor of terrorism, which is something certainly that the United States should do. And if India also has the power and ability to do so, I would recommend that India does so as well. But strength, unfortunately, has to also be met with strength.
Met with strength. I agree with that simple premise, because otherwise you set a precedent which is going to be so damaging that you will find you'll be diplomatically battling crisis after crisis till whenever we can imagine. The bottom line is this, ladies and gentlemen. Think of the families of these 8 people who have been kept in solitary confinement, and now they've been informed that they've been sentenced to death via firing squad. Think of those families. They've been accused of spying not for India, for Israel. So for diplomatic considerations, the duress that these families and these men have been put under is unforgivable, it is unforgettable. They are taunting you, they're provoking you because they want you to either move one way or the other. It is not going to be easy, but to draw an assumption that an autocratic potentate is going to hold the world's largest democracy to hostage is a flawed assumption. We see through you, we know what you're doing, we know who you're working with, we know what you are, and we know what we are. I thank my guests.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.